Okay, I'm not a professional speaker, as you'll see, but I'm just a concerned citizen like all of you are, who just felt compelled to share with my fellow Americans about this dangerous so-called free trade agreements that they're trying to pass behind Congress's back and the American people's backs. What I'm going to tell you tonight, some of you may get mad at me. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just a messenger. Everything I'm going to share with you tonight is the truth. And I have a little handout to give to everyone at the end that shows actually backup of where to go on the internet to find everything that I say. So I want to just thank Georgia Stapleton tonight for allowing me to come and speak with you. My topic tonight is Choose Freedom, Stop the Free Trade Agenda. I'm going to explain to you what this is, and I'm happy to have this opportunity because the free trade agenda is arguably the biggest threat that our nation is facing today. The free trade agenda threatens our nation's independence as well as our personal rights and freedoms as well. And this threat is coming on fast with crucial votes expected in Congress this year and next. The reason you're not hearing much about this, and you don't hear it on any of the network news, not Fox News, not CNN, none of them. You're not hearing this because it's being promoted behind the scenes by President Obama and many leading Republicans. That's what's just so frightening about this. Now let's get on with our presentation. Have you ever voted for a politician and you were sorry about your vote? Chances are you were deceived by that politician. Well, there's another deceptive package being presented to the American people today. It's called free trade. Let's look at what a couple of our founding fathers said about trade, or in their words, commerce. First, our first president, George Washington, gave us this warning in his farewell address in 1796. He said, "'Tis our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with a portion of the foreign world." Next, our third president, Thomas Jefferson, continued Washington's warning about foreign alliances that added commerce to the mix. Jefferson said in 1799, "Commerce with all nations, alliance with none shall be our motto." Then 2 years later, he stated, "I deem the essential principles of our government to be peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none." As you can see from these two quotes, Jefferson as well as Washington strongly affirmed the goodness of foreign commerce, but at the same time they strongly warned us against entangling alliances. So to summarize what the founders told us about trade and foreign alliances, trade is good while entangling alliances are bad. Later in this presentation, we'll get back to how entangling alliances and trade have become a problem for our nation in recent decades. Let's just look at what the purpose of the United States government can be boiled down to: maintaining our independence, protecting our God-given rights, among which are life, liberty, and property. On the other hand, government was not established to regulate businesses, form permanent foreign alliances, or cancel the Constitution. Very pertinent to the purposes of this presentation is the fact that the Constitution granted only Congress the exclusive power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among several states. That's in Article 1, Section 8. Which means the Constitution did not grant any power to the President or the executive branch to regulate foreign commerce. Let me repeat this for emphasis. The Constitution did not grant any power to the President or the executive branch to regulate foreign commerce. For a large part of our nation's history, Congress regulated trade with tariff acts or bills. Tariffs are fees charged by a government for permitting imports or export of products. This was the main source of revenue for the federal government, and they were used to protect certain industries. With this slide, we're going to summarize the gradual changes in congressional trade legislation in the 20th century. We've gone from acts to agreements to partnerships. First, a little history about acts. Up until the 1930s, Congress regulated foreign trade with tariff acts or bills. In the 1930s, Congress began delegating its power to regulate foreign trade to the President. Second, a little history about agreements. In the 1970s, Congress went on to delegate more of its power to regulate foreign trade to the President with its passage of legislation authorizing fast-track negotiating authority to the President. We'll discuss fast-track authority in more detail a little later. By the 1980s, the first big free trade agreement, the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, was negotiated and approved by Congress. In the 1990s, we had congressional approval of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. Third, a little history about partnerships. After 2000, multilateral partnerships became the latest thing in trade pacts. The Security and Prosperity Partnership between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico was announced in 2005. Now in 2014, the executive branch, remember Congress is the only one that's supposed to be negotiating anything with trade, but the executive branch is negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, a free trade agreement with 12 other Pacific Rim nations, and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP, with the European Union, which is a free trade agreement with the EU. Now let's review what this slide is showing us. First, we had acts or bills regarding tariffs passed by Congress. These were unilateral acts by our government. Second, in recent decades, we've had free trade agreements such as NAFTA. These are binding agreements between two or more nations. This was the beginning of foreign entanglements regarding trade. Third, since 2005, we're hearing more about partnerships. And as the slide indicates, partnerships normally refers to a legal relationship between two or more persons contractually assigned as joint principals in a business. When we apply the word partnership to legal relationships between two or more nations, you can see the implication of the governments of these nations being joint principals in governing their blocks of nations. Many government leaders today, you hear them use the word partnership, and they're deliberately implying development of more and more foreign entanglements between nations to the extent that they're planning on the economic and political integration of the nations involved in the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership mentioned earlier. And remember this, political integration always follows economic integration. This is not just about trade. Now let's look at what free trade is. As you can see on the slide, free trade is defined as international trade that is free of such government interference as import quotas, export subsidies, and protective tariffs. With this slide, we'll provide a little history of the free trade policy. In 1776, Scottish economist and moral philosopher Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, which established a new trade policy, free trade, that featured the reduction of tariffs and regulations on trade. In this presentation, we're not criticizing classical free trade policy as established by Adam Smith. However, what we do criticize is the present-day free trade policy that consists of negotiating complex trade agreements or partnerships between two or more nations that reduce tariffs, but that also include provisions for managed trade, as well as many other entanglements. We call this the free trade agenda. Now, let's move on to an example of free trade deception, that of Europe, and the steps that led to the now European Union. Beginning in the 1950s, many European political leaders, with the assistance of many American foreign policy establishment leaders, helped negotiate a series of free trade agreements among the European nations. The first agreement was for a European coal and steel community in 1952. There were 6 nations, which included France and Germany. And this was sold to the people of Europe as a way after World War II to help build more jobs and more prosperity. Does that sound familiar? Notice too, as I move along, how much bigger this area gets. Because see, they start off smaller and they keep getting bigger and bigger as more and more countries are added. The next free trade agreement established the European Economic Community in 1957. Getting bigger. Then just hitting the highlights of this series of free trade agreements came the Maastricht Treaty of 1992 that established the European Union. There are now 15 nations involved. Later, there was the Lisbon Treaty of 2007, which established the European Union Constitution. The people of Europe were told that they would be able to vote on the EU Constitution. Once the people of France and the Netherlands rejected the Constitution, however, by vote at the polls, voting was shut down. No other country was allowed to vote, and the EU Constitution was ratified by a treaty at Lisbon in 2007. In other words, the people of the member states of the EU lost their independence without even a vote. Now, as of 2013, the EU has 28 formerly independent nations which are now known as member states. These member states are virtually under the complete control of the European Commission, the European Parliament, the European Central Bank, and the Court of Justice of the European Union. Every nation that has been added to the EU has lost its independence without a vote of the people. This slide shows just how many different agreements and treaties have been signed since 1951 to build the European Union. There are quite a number of these, and each step was a small salami slice made to look harmless until the European socialists had accomplished their goal of a supranational government of Europe. You might be sitting there wondering, how are the European people deceived regarding the building of the EU? Why would the people give up their sovereignty? Well, Bernard Connolly, who is a former high official of the EU, he worked at the European Commission, said this in 1996. It has become clear to us that what we thought was a common market is nothing more than a project to create a European federal superstate in which our sovereignty, Britain's national identity, would be extinguished. Connolly is saying that while Europeans thought that the formation of the European Common Market, a free trade bloc of nations, was the goal, in actuality the Common Market Initiative was just a deceptive project to create a European federal superstate which we now know as the European Union. For those who care to learn more about the EU free trade deception, Christopher Booker and Richard North published a book in 2003 called The Great Deception and subtitled The Secret History of the European Union. In this book, North and Booker state that the European Union is a slow-motion coup d'etat, the most spectacular coup d'etat in history. A coup d'etat, of course, is an illegal change of government. An even bigger coup d'etat is already being negotiated behind our backs by the United States and the European Union. It's called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP. More on this a little later. Now let's look at some transitions in American trade policy which have made the free trade agreements of the past few decades possible. Beginning in 1787, the Constitution, of course, we stated, gave Congress the power to regulate foreign trade. Congress began to delegate trade policy authority to the President in 1934. Then Congress ceded even more trade policy authority to the President with fast-track authority in 1974. Here's a brief description of fast-track authority. What this does, it's a bill, it's voted on, and I'll go over that at the end of my presentation. Congress gives the President, they just hand their authority, which is unconstitutional, over to the President to negotiate trade agreements. Fast track requires Congress to vote completed agreements up or down within 60 days with no amendments or filibusters. Fast track has been in effect from 1974 to 1994, and then it was stopped, and it started in 2002 to 2007, and it's not in effect right now, and that's why I'm here today. We've got to stop it. It will never be in effect. Here's a graphic showing the years when Fast Track Authority, now being called Trade Promotion Authority. So Fast Track, guys, and Trade Promotion Authority, TPA, are the same thing. The gray bars show the years that I just mentioned when Fast Track was in effect. Now we'll look at the progress toward a North American Union here in America. In 1979, presidential candidate Ronald Reagan kicked things off with his announcement of his strong support for a North American Accord, which we now see in hindsight was an embryonic proposal for a North American Union. Then under President George H.W. Bush in 1989, we got the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. This was our nation's first free trade agreement. Then under President Clinton in 1994, we got the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Under President George W. Bush, we got the Security and Prosperity Partnership between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. This represented an attempt to build a North American Union on the foundation of the NAFTA agreement. So we can see the parallels here of what they're doing to us in the United States as what happened to the European Union. In the United States, it's gone from accords to agreements to partnerships, which are unions. In Europe, same thing, but just have different names. It was from community to common market to union. It's all leading to economic and then political integration. In 2009, the Security and Prosperity Partnership was phased out, but its attempts to build a North American Union still continue. They never stop. They just change the names. Under President Obama, as part of the North American Leaders Summit beginning in 2005 to the present. Here's the timeline of free trade agenda events for the United States pertaining to the building of a North American Union. We don't have time to cover all of these items on this timeline. This graphic is in a special report of our New American magazine, and they're available in the back. You can get one at the end. There's fantastic articles in there. It's worth highlighting that a Free Trade Area of the Americas, or FTAA, initiative began in 1994 and began picking up momentum in 2001. The John Birch Society launched a Stop the FTAA campaign in 2004, and in late 2005, the FTAA movement fizzled out. Then in 2005, President George W. Bush announced the Security and Prosperity Partnership Agreement. That same year, the John Birch Society launched a Stop the North American Union campaign. By 2009, the SPP and the NAU initiative was abandoned. They didn't stop, they just abandoned it for a while, but it was temporarily stopped. In 2011, Robert Pastor, I don't know if any of you have heard of him, he's a Council on Foreign Relations member. He's recently passed away, though. He was known as the father of the North American Union. He published The North American Idea, a Vision of a Continental Future, in which he specifically named the John Birch Society as among the leading groups that have been the most vocal, active, and intense on North American issues, and that the John Birch Society was effective in inhibiting the Bush administration and deterring the Obama administration from any grand initiatives. With this slide, we'll review the various partnerships that the U.S. has been getting involved in. First, as I mentioned earlier, was the Free Trade Area of the Americas from 1994 to 2005. We've already mentioned how it fizzled out. Then there was the Security and Prosperity Partnership from 2005 to 2009, which we mentioned. We've already discussed how both the FTAA and the SPP fizzled out in 2005 and 2009 respectively, due largely in opposition by the JBS. Here's a new partnership our government is working on, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Then there's the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Negotiations started on this partnership in July 2013. Here's a very brief review of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The details are also available in that same issue of the New American. Negotiations started from 2010 to the present, and a vote on this is expected as soon as the lame duck session after our November elections this year. There are 12 Pacific Rim nations involved, including the U.S., Canada, Mexico, Japan, Australia, Singapore, Peru, Malaysia, and Vietnam. It's an EU-type bloc for the Asia-Pacific region. See, they're regionalizing all of us. It is leading to economic and political integration of all 21 nations of APEC. And APEC is the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, and APEC includes China. One thing I want to say about this also is APEC also includes all 12 of these nations already. So it was already formed to help trade and prosperity. Why do they need another trade agreement? It's because they keep little salami slices of our freedom and liberty they keep taking. Then there's the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Negotiations began on this from 2013 and are continuing today. A vote on this is expected in 2015 or 2016. A free trade agreement, it's a free trade agreement between the U.S. and the European Union. And after going over the European Union, we know what free trade means to the European people. It means losing their sovereignty in their nations. And this would lead to economic and political integration of the United States and the EU. A key educational resource is that New American that I talked about tonight. Some of the articles in this magazine include The Free Trade Agenda Threatens Our Rights, Global Merger, Piece by Piece, Regional Scheme for the Pacific Rim, and many others. Some of the tools that initial educational tools for the Stop the Free Trade Agenda project are as follows. From the left, you have the JBS website. You go to jbs.org and click on the right side, and it has Stop the Free Trade Agenda. Then we have a couple of pamphlets that you can just hand out to people and let them know we need to stop this, and they need to call their senators and representatives. Then that same, the special New American report, 2 reprints which cover the TPP and the TTIP agreements. And since this has come out, we now have a little booklet called How the Free Trade Agenda Affects You. This is the closest thing we have available in the back to my presentation today. And also, our CEO has written a book called International Merger by Foreign Entanglements. Very good book on showing the history of how countries get involved in all of these. This slide tells you how you can stop the free trade agenda. These trade deals threaten our national independence, our freedoms, and our economy. You can educate others with the tools that we have available that I showed on the previous slide. Provide leadership to your groups in your area, and if you know other people that you'd like this to be shared with, I'd be more than happy to do that. And you can get more information from Choose Freedom, Stop the Free Trade Agenda on the JBS page, jbs.org page. The bottom line is that we need sufficient grassroots opposition that it must be generated. And I know sometimes we feel powerless, but we're still free, that we can stop this. And the little handout sheet that I gave everyone, let's look at that. We'll go over what needs to be done to stop this. Everyone needs to call and email their congressmen and senators, and I'll put everyone I know Georgia told me that your congressman and all on here, that you have the numbers to call right there and tell them not to approve for the renewal of trade promotion authority for the president. A vote could come, like I said, in the lame duck session after the 2014 elections or in early 2015. No free trade agenda, guys, has ever passed in the United States without the president having trade promotion authority first. So if it should pass, can we still stop it? Yes, but it'll be harder to stop. It's much easier if we stop it now, stop the TPA. Also, I'm going to give y'all some very interesting information about some of your representatives in Texas. I called my representative, I call him all the time, and my representative in Texas, U.S. representative, is Kenny Marchant. And I talked to his policy advisor last week, and I asked him, do you know how Mr. Marchant is going to vote on the TPA? And of course, I kind of rattled his cage. I could tell that he had not talked, not many people have called, guys. I mean, that's why we've got to call him and got to email him. And he told me, after kind of, going back and forth and not really wanting to answer me, that Mr. Marchant would probably vote in favor of TPA. And I asked him, why do congressmen give their power to the president, especially a president that they always say is a problem? He couldn't answer that. But he did give me the bill numbers of 3830 in the House bill, and of course I found out the Senate bill was S1900. Then after talking with Mr. Marchand, I did, if you research this and that handout, please everybody don't leave without me giving you, I didn't want you to read the handout before I gave it out to everyone, but I found out that, like last week, that there's a group called the Transatlantic Policy Network, tpnonline.org, and it's on my little sheet that I'll give you at the end. It's a group of people that include U.S. congressmen, U.S. senators, multinational corporations, think tank groups. But, the people cannot read this bill. But this is the group, and it's one of many that are deciding this. Who are some of the congressional members on this group? John Boehner, Eric Cantor. Of course, we know where Eric Cantor is headed out the door. Darrell Issa, and in Texas, Kenny Marchand, my representative, is on this board writing the policy for all of this. Michael Conaway, which I understand is some of the people Georgia said here, maybe your representative, and Kevin Brady. If you go to their website, here's what they say that their purpose is. Part of the purpose would be to contribute to the development of global rules. I mean, that's not American rules, this is global rules. Whose rules are those? I think we're talking about the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. So the next thing too is to call when you're on the phone with them, tell your U.S. congressmen and senators not to vote for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and also call your senators also and tell them not to vote, and representatives for the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And please tell all of your friends and family members, because this is the whole U.S. If you have relatives and friends in Georgia, Florida, wherever, New York, call them and tell them to call their senators and their representatives and not tell them not to vote for this TPA. We invite you to join us to preserve our national independence, our personal freedoms, and our economy by working with us to stop the free trade agenda. Some of the other things, just one other thing I wanted to mention too is, people might think, well, the EU, is it really that bad? I mean, well, in 2005 in London, former Soviet dictator Mikhail Gorbachev, an outspoken proponent of the New World Order, approvingly referred to the Brussels-based European Union as the new European Soviet. He likes it. That's a scary thought. And of course, the Soviet is a governmental council used to control the people and prevent counter-revolution. So I feel that this is the biggest threat and we have to stop it. So I will take questions. If anybody has any questions, I'll be glad to answer anything. And if I can't answer it, I'll get your name and I'll email the answer to you. Thank you.